For the longest time, we were told these were just isolated issues.
Right. A contained problem here, a policy mistake there.
Exactly. A bit of fraud here, a few policy failures over there. But when you actually stack the source material up, when you put all the puzzle pieces together, Minnesota, New York, Texas, the whole federal system, what emerges is not, it's not a series of accidents.
No.
It's a national blueprint for systemic failure.
It's absolutely a structural crisis, and it's one that's happening, simultaneously in multiple critical zones. We are looking at claims that directly link massive financial fraud in the Midwest, a just staggering number of missing children at the border, and the resulting budget collapse of America's largest city.
And it's all connected.
All of it, according to the sources we've analyzed, is held together by the same sophisticated and highly politicized nonprofit industrial complex.
I want to focus on the emotional core of this for a second, the betrayal. A system that was designed to feed hungry children, to shelter the most vulnerable refugees, was allegedly exploited for over $1 billion.
$1 billion.
$1 billion meant for welfare, just stolen, siphoned away through these sophisticated fraud networks in Minnesota.
And at the very same time those networks were operating, the cracks weren't just appearing at the federal level, they were blowing wide open. Specifically within the Office of Refugee Resettlement, the ORR, which is part of Health and Human Services.
And the numbers there.
The numbers are morally devastating. 85,000. That's how many migrant children were placed with sponsors and are now completely, totally unaccounted for.
85,000 kids vanished. And the consequence of this entire structural meltdown, it's not abstract. It's hitting home right now in places like New York City.
Right.
Officials there have admitted that the migrant influx is going to drain the city's budget by a staggering $12 billion.
$12 billion.
And that is forcing New York to do the unthinkable, to literally cannibalize its own essential services. We're talking police, schools, libraries, just to fund the infrastructure of this crisis.
It's the ultimate synthesis of catastrophe, really. The financial rot in Minnesota, the moral collapse at the federal border, and the urban destruction in New York City. They are not separate stories.
No.
They are stages of the same disease. And it proves that this national failure pipeline is operating at full capacity.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to expose the full truth right here on this deep dive. If you want the news they don't want you to hear, hit that subscribe button right now. Welcome back. So we have to start with the dollar signs because that's usually the first sign of systemic rot, isn't it?
It's the loudest alarm bell.
We're focusing on Minnesota, which for years was held up as this model, a model for humanitarian aid and refugee resettlement. But according to the whistleblowers in these massive court documents we've been reviewing, it allegedly became the epicenter of the largest welfare fraud scheme in American history.
The Feeding Our Future scandal.
That's the one. And the estimates now have soared past $1 billion.
And what's really fascinating here, and what demands a deeper look than just the shocking dollar amount, is the sheer financial architecture of the alleged exploitation.
What do you mean by architecture?
This wasn't simple graph. This wasn't someone just skimming a little off the top. This was, as one source describes it, importing a third world corruption model and embedding it deep inside the most vulnerable part of the American welfare system, child nutrition aid.
So how do they do it? How do you execute $1 billion scam using a program that's designed to feed children? What were the mechanical steps?
The mechanism was, on the surface, deceptively simple, and it relied heavily on the total lack of oversight surrounding NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and this concept of third-party sponsors.
Right.
So the federal government, through the Department of Agriculture, channels money for summer and after-school food programs. That money goes through state agencies.
Right.
In Minnesota, the key intermediary was this organization called Feeding Our Future. It was a nonprofit that allegedly acted as a conduit, a gateway.
So Feeding Our Future, or FOUF, was the main hub.
Exactly. FOUF sponsored hundreds of so-called meal sites. But here's the thing. These sites were often shell nonprofits themselves, set up by individuals who, it's alleged, had absolutely no intention of feeding a single child.
They just existed on paper.
On paper. They would simply submit these inflated or, in many cases, entirely fabricated invoices claiming they were serving thousands of meals a day. The sources describe operators claiming to feed, say, 5,000 children daily out of a single suburban storefront.
5,000 out of one small building.
Or even out of abandoned office buildings.
Yeah.
The sheer volume of claimed meals just completely overwhelmed the state's ability or willingness to verify any of it.
And that is the emotional point that just kills me. This money, intended for the basic sustenance of hungry kids, was allegedly siphoned off. We have to ask, where did this $1 billion actually go? Because the source material details an almost cartoonish level of luxury payoff.
The contrast is horrifying, isn't it? The money that was meant for essential basic care was allegedly converted into assets that just scream excess.
Like what?
Well, we're talking about vast amounts of cash being transferred often into offshore accounts, according to the investigation. But more visibly, the money allegedly funded million-dollar private properties.
In homes.
Yes, including one house with an indoor basketball court, luxury cars like Teslas and Porsches, even private jet time. The source points to one operator who allegedly purchased a $2.5 million home in Florida with stolen funds.
Wow.
It just illustrates that the goal wasn't just survival. It was extreme, opulent wealth extracted directly from the poor.
And the scale creep of this alleged fraud, that's a huge red flag on its own. It started, what, at $250 million in the initial estimates?
That's right, $250 million. Then investigators hit the $500 million mark very, very quickly.
And now?
No. Analysts are projecting the total potential loss could realistically surpass $1 billion. This wasn't a static scheme. It was a tumor that was allowed to metastasize because the oversight system completely failed.
But the failure wasn't passive. This is the part of the story that's truly chilling. The whistleblower suppression.
Yes. We are not talking about simple bureaucratic inertia here. We are talking about active political shielding, according to the source material.
So people inside the system were trying to stop it.
Absolutely. Internal state employees, auditors, investigators, they were raising alarms about suspicious invoices, about red flag operators, about sites that looked fraudulent, and they were doing this as early as 2018.
They saw the fire starting, and they tried to grab the extinguisher.
And their claims, which are detailed in the source material, suggest their efforts were actively suppressed. Staff repeatedly warned Governor Tim Walz's administration about these fraudulent networks.
So the governor's office knew.
They were warned. In 2019, one investigator allegedly flagged a suspicious payment of $400,000, only to be told, essentially, to back off.
Back off by who?
The specific and really chilling claim, reported by one whistleblower, was that the governor's chief of staff allegedly yelled at them, demanding they stop disrupting relationships with community partners tied to Democrat power structures.
Wait, hold on a second. Let's unpack that specific accusation.
It's a heavy one.
Because if that claim is true, it suggests that the political goal of maintaining favorable relationships with these community partners, who are now charged with massive fraud, that goal superseded the legal and moral duty to protect taxpayer funds and vulnerable children.
That is the direct implication.
So is the source claiming the fraud was allowed to continue because the fraudsters were politically connected?
That is the direct implication drawn in the source material, yes. The political imperative to protect these organizations allegedly created a firewall around them, making them untouchable.
And the consequence of that alleged silencing?
It's profound. Think about it. If those state employees had been allowed to pursue their investigations rigorously back in 2018 or 2019, the $1 billion would never have been stolen.
It would have been stopped at a few million.
Exactly. The suppression of oversight was the necessary condition for this alleged fraud to grow from a small scam into the largest welfare fraud in U.S. history.
And the moment that really gets me is the lack of immediate justice, even after the convictions. There was a KSTP report that detailed this.
I saw that.
It said that even after a jury convicted some of these fraudsters of stealing millions, they still own the million-dollar properties they bought with the stolen money. 9 months later, the houses haven't been seized.
Still in their possession.
An indoor basketball court, purchased with money meant for hungry kids, is still in the alleged criminal's possession. How is that even possible?
That's where we get into the complex and, frankly, frustrating reality of asset forfeiture.
It seems like it should be simple. They stole the money, they bought a house, you take the house.
You'd think so. But the legal system, especially when it's dealing with high-value, complex assets like real estate, moves agonizingly slowly. While prosecutors filed the paperwork for civil and criminal forfeiture, the properties often cannot be officially seized or liquidated until the convicted individuals are formally sentenced.
And why does the sentencing hold up the process?
Sentencing is what locks in the final judgment and the specific restitution orders. Until that point, defense lawyers can fight the forfeiture through appeals or, other complex legal maneuvers that are designed to drag the process out as long as possible.
So it's a feature, not a bug. of the system.
For them, it is. For the average person, stealing a small amount of cash results in immediate consequences. For these organized, well-funded networks, they can afford the best lawyers who exploit every single procedural delay, maximizing the time they get to benefit from the proceeds of the alleged crime.
And in the meantime,
we're seeing property taxes over $50,000 delinquent in one case just being ignored while this legal battle over seizure continues. It sends a terrible signal that financial crime, if it's organized and large enough, comes with a substantial delay on punishment.
it certainly reinforces the perception that there are two systems of justice, one for the common person and one for politically connected financial criminals.
So,
Okay, Minnesota exposed the financial rot using this shell NGO structure.
the money pipeline.
Exactly. Now we transition to the moral rot at the federal level, because while this $1 billion was being siphoned off, federal agencies were losing something far more valuable.
Children.
Children. This is the moral scandal that I think overshadows even the staggering financial cost. We have to focus on the number. 85,000?
Say again?
85,000. That is the number of migrant children who arrived in the U.S. under the Biden administration, specifically overseen by the Department of Health and Human Services and its Office of Refugee Resettlement, who are now unaccounted for. They have vanished inside the system. How does the United States government lose the population of a small city? I mean, what went wrong at the operational level?
The failure was systemic, and it was driven by a single imperative: prioritizing speed over safety.
Get them out of the detention centers as fast as possible.
Exactly. The core process is supposed to ensure a child arriving at the border is placed with a vetted, safe sponsor, ideally a parent or a close relative. But the system became completely overwhelmed, and the pressure was immense to move children out of crowded holding facilities quickly. The source we're analyzing states that the agencies essentially turned the border into a conveyor belt.
The conveyor belt analogy is crucial. What specific safety checks did they drop or dramatically reduce to achieve that speed?
Several critical steps were allegedly abandoned or just rushed through. First, the vetting of sponsors became dangerously superficial. In many cases, it was little more than a quick phone call check rather than a deep background investigation.
So no home visits, no real follow-up.
And that's the second and most critical failure. The follow-up stage was either eliminated or just drastically reduced. After a child was placed with a sponsor, there was minimal, and in some cases zero, effort to reliably check in, to confirm the child was safe, or even to ensure they were attending school.
So once the child left federal custody,
Accountability vanished. The file was closed.
and the consequence of this negligence, according to investigators, is horrifying.
It's absolutely horrifying. The source material claims that the lack of rigorous vetting meant that many of these children were not placed with genuine caregivers at all. They were effectively handed directly to traffickers, to forced labor rings, and to criminal enterprises operating just under the radar.
So these 85,000 children weren't just misplaced.
No, they were absorbed into an ecosystem of exploitation.
And is this the same ecosystem we were just talking about in Minnesota? Is there a direct tie between the financial fraud network and the human trafficking network?
That is the essential insight that ties this entire national pipeline together. The children were lost inside the same structural framework, an ecosystem of NGOs, shell nonprofits, and border intermediaries.
The same kind of groups.
The very same. The organizations that, according to the source, benefited from loose oversight and political protection in Minnesota to siphon cash were perfectly positioned at the border to process and place unvetted children with sponsors who are allegedly part of these criminal networks.
So the infrastructure was already there.
The infrastructure of exploitation, the zero accountability environment created by political pressure and those pandemic waivers was already in place. It facilitated the theft of money and the trafficking of children.
So the mechanism of financial rot became the mechanism of moral rot.
Yeah.
Okay, let's track the consequence of this chaos as it moves inland, because it explodes onto the national stage, specifically in New York City. The failure pipeline is now creating an urban collapse.
The numbers in New York City are financially catastrophic for the average resident. City officials have been forced to admit that the migrant crisis will cost the city over $12 billion. And that's the acknowledged cost over the next 3 years, forcing emergency cuts to essential services.
This isn't just budget tightening.
No, this is a systemic drain, a hemorrhage.
$12 billion. To put that into perspective for our listeners, that is more than the annual operating budgets of many entire U.S. states. Why is the cost so astronomical for New York specifically?
The analysis in the source material points directly to the Sanctuary Without Limits policy. New York City, unlike a federal entity, is required by its own laws to provide housing, education, and legal services immediately upon arrival.
And the volume of arrivals.
Sheer volume, hundreds of thousands of people, means the infrastructure costs just multiply exponentially. They're having to pay for temporary shelter, often costing hundreds of dollars per night per family in hotels. They're paying for legal aid, medical care, and creating entirely new school programs from scratch.
So the cost isn't just housing.
No, it's building a parallel city infrastructure overnight.
And that infrastructure is now being funded by cannibalizing the existing services that 8 million residents rely on. This is where the rubber meets the road for the everyday New Yorker.
Absolutely.
What are the specific services being cut to fund this crisis?
The cuts are hitting where it hurts the most: public safety and quality of life. The city has reportedly been forced to enact massive hiring freezes and outright budget reductions in the police department, fire department, sanitation, and education.
So what does that look like on the street?
It looks like police precinct reassignments, fewer garbage pickups, library branches cutting their hours, and specific school programs like those for gifted students or even just extracurricular activities being vetted to reroute funds.
So the city is dismantling itself.
It's dismantling itself because the infrastructure supporting the migrant flow is draining the budget faster than it can ever be replenished.
And the visual evidence of this is just as shocking as the financial numbers. I mean, we've all seen the images. Schools turned into migrant shelters,
Community centers converted into temporary housing.
parks becoming processing zones. It fundamentally transforms the public spaces that define what it means to live in a city.
And that transformation has real consequences for the municipal workforce. Social workers, who are already dealing with massive burnout, are being pushed to their breaking points.
Teachers.
Teachers are suddenly tasked with managing overcrowded classrooms with students who may have faced severe trauma, often without the resources or training to do so. Police officers are being reassigned to shelter duty instead of patrolling neighborhoods.
The whole system is strained.
The entire structure of the civil service is under extreme strain, and that leads to massive internal resentment and, of course, pressure from residents who feel like their needs are being completely abandoned.
Okay, so Minnesota showed us the financial fraud. New York City shows us the urban cost. Now we need to look south, to Texas, to understand the operational complexity of the human pipeline itself.
Right.
Law enforcement in Texas is reporting the largest surge of sophisticated fraud ever recorded at the border.
Yes. And we need to be clear. This isn't just about people slipping across the border. This is about complex, well-organized, and highly sophisticated fraud networks designed specifically to exploit the loopholes in our current immigration system.
What are they seeing?
They're seeing a massive surge of fake families, fake IDs, and fraudulent sponsorships.
And we're not talking about crude, hand-drawn documents here. What does the mechanics of this deception look like on the ground?
The sources indicate a very high level of coordination. This involves forged birth certificates and identity documents that are designed to match and look incredibly professional.
Wow.
It also involves rehearsed family stories. Individuals are coached extensively on their narratives to make sure their stories are consistent when they're questioned by Border Patrol. This whole pipeline is highly efficient, and it's designed to capitalize on the policy that exempts or fast-tracks family units compared to, say, single adult males.
And this is where it gets really, really dark, this recycling phenomenon.
Yeah.
What exactly is the reporting on this that CBP agents have described?
This is one of the most disturbing revelations. CBP Customs and Border Protection agents report encountering adults who arrive at the border with children they've never met before.
They just met them that day.
That day. The adult and the child pose as a family unit to gain faster entry into the country. When DNA tests are mandated, which is happening more often now, they prove there is no biological relation.
So what happens to the child?
The children are allegedly being recycled.
Meaning what?
Meaning a child who has already crossed the border, or one who is part of a trafficking network, is used multiple times by unrelated adults to expedite their entry under the family exemption.
Oh my God.
And after entry, the child is just pushed back into the exploitative networks we discussed earlier, often for forced labor or worse.
This suggests a highly industrialized approach to exploitation. The children aren't just collateral damage, they're actively being used as tools to manipulate the system.
They are the key to unlocking the gate.
And at the same time, state troopers in Texas are uncovering these sprawling counterfeit rings.
Exactly. The fraud at the border is supported by a massive logistics operation inward. State troopers are reporting the dismantling of counterfeit rings that are producing fake IDs, counterfeit green cards, work permits, and Social Security documents at an industrial scale.
So it's a complete end-to-end system.
It provides the entire infrastructure necessary for those who enter illegally to then live, work, and operate completely undetected within the U.S. economy.
So we have the money pipeline in Minnesota, the missing children at the federal level, the urban collapse in New York, and now the human pipeline exposed in Texas. What ties the Texas operation back to the failures we saw up in Minnesota?
It's the McCurring fingerprint. It's the reliance on the very same structural weak points.
The NGOs.
The same structure of nonprofit sponsors, community intermediaries, and political shielding that allegedly protected Minnesota's financial fraudsters is now reportedly protecting the networks facilitating border fraud and human recycling in Texas.
It's the same playbook.
The system was designed to defer responsibility to these NGOs, and when that structure lacks any accountability, it becomes an open invitation for massive criminal exploitation. Texas isn't dealing with random, desperate acts. It's dealing with an established system of fraud that was built and incentivized during years of minimal enforcement and oversight.
So the infrastructure of corruption is national,
Mm-hmm.
and it runs on a single engine, which the source defines as the nonprofit industrial complex.
We really need to dedicate time to defining this term, because for most listeners, the word nonprofit suggests altruism and charity.
Right, something good.
But the source uses this term to describe a massive shadow ecosystem. Organizations that are elevated as untouchable humanitarian groups, but which allegedly function as clearinghouses for fraud, trafficking, and government exploitation across the entire country.
And the goal?
The goal of this complex, according to the source, is simply to absorb taxpayer dollars under the guise of compassion.
How is this shadow ecosystem allowed to flourish with basically zero vetting and oversight?
It's a combination of political expediency and structural negligence. During the years leading up to this crisis, thousands of new NGOs and intermediary partners were approved for migrant handling, resettlement, and shelter operations.
And nobody checked them out.
The source claims this was done with little to no vetting or rigorous auditing. The operational goal was rapid resettlement and processing, which made these organizations indispensable politically, which in turn made them untouchable legally.
And the pandemic-era waivers just threw gasoline on the fire.
Compounded the problem exponentially. We need to clearly define what specific oversight rules were suspended under those COVID waivers and how that created the immediate opportunity for fraud on this scale.
Okay, lay it out.
It's critical.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to the waivers, there were standard federal rules for verification in programs like Feeding Our Future. This included mandatory in-person auditing of meal sites to verify the number of children they claimed to be serving.
You have to actually see the kids.
You had to see the kids. COVID waivers suspended these requirements, removing verification steps and allowing claims to be filed based on what was essentially the honor code or self-certification.
Unbelievable.
For NGOs operating at the border, similar waivers reduced the necessity for in-depth background checks on sponsors and delayed any follow-up requirements.
So they removed the only mechanism designed to stop fraud, the mandatory in-person verification. And then they channeled billions of dollars into a system based on trusting organizations that had every financial incentive to cheat.
Precisely. And the result was immediate and predictable exploitation. The Federal Inspector General issued warnings that these nonprofits may have collectively misused billions in various funds, not just child nutrition, but COVID relief, migrant aid, housing funds, child care subsidies.
It was a free-for-all.
The sheer volume of money flowing without verification created a gold rush for those willing to exploit the loopholes. And that's what established the nonprofit industrial complex as an industry engineered to absorb taxpayer dollars rather than just a humanitarian aid network.
What's so fascinating here is the pattern. When you map the epicenters of this crisis, Minneapolis, New York City, Houston, El Paso, San Antonio, they are not random geographical points.
No. Not at all.
They share a specific systemic trait.
That's the strategic insight. It's governance, not geography. These hotspots share the exact same pattern. They operate under the same political leadership, are dominated by the same vast nonprofit empires, and adhere to the same sanctuary policies, which leads invariably to the same catastrophic outcomes.
So Minneapolis showed how the fraudulent NGOs could distribute millions with zero oversight.
New York showed how a city could cannibalize its own public safety net to meet the demands.
And the Texas border cities.
They became the intake zones, dominated by groups serving as intermediaries for human exploitation.
It's a hybrid crisis then. Not just a single failure, but a perfect storm where financial fraud, border chaos, and political negligence all merge to fundamentally break the system.
It's the ultimate synthesis. And the source claims that this is no longer accidental incompetence. It is a structural failure that's been embedded by years of negligence and policies that rewarded speed and political association over security and accountability.
And the taxpayer is holding the bill.
The taxpayer is holding the bill and facing the consequences of a system that refused to police its own.
And we absolutely need to talk about that bill, because the impact on the American taxpayer is immediate and it's personal.
Yeah.
In Minnesota, the shock wasn't just the $1 billion stolen. It was the realization that this opulence, the private jets and million-dollar homes, was purchased with money meant to help their neighbor's hungry child.
The erosion of trust is as damaging as the financial loss.
Yeah.
And in New York, the consequences are hitting the home budget directly. Parents are watching school resources disappear, classes are getting overcrowded, and public safety is strained because resources were rerouted.
Right.
Working families are paying for a crisis they had no hand in creating, while the groups allegedly facilitating the crisis, these NGOs remain largely untouchable.
Which brings us to this shift in enforcement and accountability. Because if this crisis was just a matter of bad luck, we wouldn't see the kind of aggressive, system-wide crackdown that the source material reports is now underway.
And we must report impartially on the claims regarding the current administration's enforcement stance. The source material claims that the sitting president is calling the crisis exactly what it is: a system-wide breakdown created by fraud, incompetence, and intentional negligence during previous years.
So what specific actions are being taken to dismantle this failure pipeline? Starting with the financial rot we saw in Minnesota.
The source material indicates a major systemic overhaul that focuses on financial accountability. This includes full-scale, mandatory audits of every major NGO that received migrant or welfare funding from 2020 through 2024.
So follow the money.
Follow the money. Furthermore, the Department of Justice is reportedly building and prioritizing criminal cases against individuals and organizations tied to this benefit fraud. The goal is to shut down the financial engine of the nonprofit industrial complex.
And what about the moral rot? The 85,000 missing children. Are the federal agencies finally being ordered to address this moral catastrophe?
Yes, the enforcement shift reportedly includes a direct mandate to those federal agencies. Homeland Security and ICE have been ordered to reopen and expand trafficking investigations that are linked directly to those missing migrant children.
So they're trying to find them.
The goal is to aggressively track and prosecute the criminal networks that allegedly took custody of these minors.
And finally, the human pipeline in Texas. We discussed the fake families, the forged documents, the recycling horror. What structural changes are being implemented to shut that specific mechanism of fraud down?
The border reforms, as they're detailed in the source material, are focused on verification and immediate removal of bad actors. This includes expanded checkpoints, mandatory DNA verification for all family units to immediately combat the fake family phenomenon, enhanced ID screening, and critically expanding immediate deportation authority for anyone caught using fraudulent documents.
So change the incentives.
The strategy, according to the source, is to fundamentally change the incentives at the border. Remove the ability for criminal networks to use human beings as tools for expedited entry.
Now, this is where the conversation turns highly political, and we must maintain strict impartiality here, reporting solely on the claims and commentary cited in the source material itself.
Absolutely.
The source includes highly controversial and inflammatory political commentary directed at specific community leaders and ethnic groups in Minnesota, linking the alleged fraud to political rhetoric.
That's correct. The source material references specific inflammatory commentary from a political figure aimed at Ilhan, Omar, and the Somali community in Minnesota.
And this commentary includes?
It includes the claim that Omar allegedly married her brother, that she should be thrown out of the country, and the highly controversial and politically charged remark that the Somali community has destroyed Minnesota and taken billions of dollars out of the country through these alleged fraud schemes.
And as you rightly stated, we are reporting on the commentary and claims cited in the source material, not endorsing those viewpoints. But the source material links this rhetoric directly to the planned enforcement actions.
That is the claim presented. The material reports on an expected ICE crackdown in Minneapolis and St. Paul, specifically targeting members of the Somali community here illegally who have final deportation orders.
And investigations.
It also mentions expanded investigations linked to the community in the wake of the high-profile financial fraud scandals. The source claims this combination of political rhetoric and targeted enforcement is necessary to establish real accountability, contrasting it sharply with what they view as political cowardice and intentional negligence during previous years.
This just highlights the deep complexity of the crisis, where massive systemic fraud, the alleged $1 billion scam, becomes the primary justification used in the political sphere for sweeping immigration reforms and enforcement crackdowns.
Right. It's the collision of the financial rot and the political response.
And the assertion made by the source is that since the crisis is this hybrid merger of financial fraud, border chaos, and political negligence, the response has to be equally aggressive across all fronts.
Financial audits to shut down the money pipeline, increased law enforcement to shut down the human pipeline, and a political will to target the system that allegedly protected these operations for years. That's the argument.
The danger for you, for the listener, is realizing that this is not a short-term problem that ends with a few arrests. It's a structural crisis that is fundamentally reshaping the nation, draining its resources and challenging its moral core.
That's the chilling final thought. Minnesota was not the disaster. It was the signal.
A proof of concept.
It was a proof of concept. The systems, the incentives, the political shielding, and the mechanism for exploitation. They were perfected there and then replicated across every major sanctuary city in America.
It started with shell nonprofits, grew through border loopholes, and metastasized through unvetted sponsorships.
Exactly. This structural failure is now embedded. The consequences are everywhere. New York is collapsing financially. Texas is overwhelmed with fraudulent families, and tens of thousands of children are missing. The long-term implication is that if the nation does not decide to enact meaningful structural repair, overhauling NGO vetting, mandating rigorous financial audits, and restoring accountability at the border, this failure, which combines every form of rot, will permanently erode national stability and trust, shifting the massive financial burden entirely onto the working families who had no part in building this crisis.
That's the reality we're facing. But I want to know what you think.
Yeah.
Hearing about $1 billion in fraud alongside 85,000 missing kids, knowing that the same structural problems are showing up in every major city. What piece of this entire pattern shocks you the most? Is it the financial cost, the moral catastrophe, or the realization that these networks were allegedly protected by political actors? Let us know your opinion in the comments below. We read every single one. I'm Alex.
And I'm Sophia. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.